At 90 years old, Apollo 16 astronaut Charles Duke is reflecting on the most extraordinary chapter of his life.
They can appear, and so nothing human can make a 90-degree turn at 3,000 miles an hour. And that's my people laugh at me generally, but I'm not going to be, I don't care.
Once celebrated as the youngest man to set foot on the lunar surface, Duke has now chosen to speak candidly about his experiences on the moon and his changing views on UFOs. A decorated U.S. Air Force officer and test pilot, Duke's words carry the weight of first-hand exploration, offering a rare glimpse into Apollo and the mysteries beyond Earth.
I'm on the moon. I'm on the moon. And the excitement, the wonder, the thrill, the adventure of it all. Well, that happened right away after we landed. You know, I'm on the moon, I'm on the moon. And you could hardly believe it because we were 6 hours late. Now we're here.
Hey, John, while you're sampling there, you might look around and see if you see any vesicular basalt.
Charles Duke calls UFOs demons. Charles Duke, the Apollo 16 moonwalker and one of the most recognizable voices from NASA's golden era, is reflecting on his experiences in orbit or on the lunar surface. In recent years, he's offered a deeply personal and faith-inflected interpretation of UFOs, asserting a view that challenges the most popular extraterrestrial narrative. He believes they are not aliens, but demonic beings, spiritual deceivers meant to draw people away from God. In interviews and clips shared online, Duke has been straightforward about his beliefs about UFOs. When he was asked whether he believes in alien life, he actually admitted that UFOs are real, but they are better described as demonic rather than extraterrestrial. His reasoning is rooted in the Christian tradition. He argues that Satan can masquerade as an angel of light and has entities capable of lighting fast, impossibly sharp aerial maneuvers, say 90-degree turn at thousands of miles per hour, simply defy human or technological explanation. For Duke, these aren't visitations from alien planets, but instead supernatural illusions, orchestrated to distract humanity from its true creator. What makes Duke's perspective especially compelling is how it connects to his own spiritual journey. During his time at NASA, he says he was a Christian in name only, and his faith was present but not deeply rooted. It was only after returning from the moon that he began to wrestle with profound internal unrest. He dealt with a lack of peace, a marriage under strain, and a gnawing uncertainty about why he was even alive. In 1975, his wife converted to Christianity in a deeply transformative way, and 2 years later, Duke himself made a firm decision to commit his life to Jesus. He says that this turning point saved their marriage and brought him peace he had never known. In fact, that peace gave birth to a new purpose. Duke and his wife went on to found a Christian ministry, Duke Ministry for Christ, through which he now spends much of his time. In his view, the UFO obsession in broader culture is a part of a spiritual warfare, a cunning ruse to keep people marveling at flying saucers instead of turning their hearts back to God. The conviction echoes a broader theological framework that he calls the demonic UFO hypothesis, and many Christian teachers argue that instead of being physical visitors from distant planets, UFOs are manifestations of spiritual beings, demons of fallen angels that exploit the human imagination and technological fascination to sow confusion about truth. In some public conversations, Duke reflects on how other astronauts struggle with the spiritual void after the moon missions. He noted how, despite having done something humanity once thought impossible, many astronauts struggle with meaning once their mission ends, especially since they've stayed in space and viewed Earth from a distance. Duke sees his own faith journey as an answer to that emptiness. NASA gave him unparalleled achievement, but his relationship with God gave him a deeper, lasting meaning beyond medals or history books. It's also telling that Duke, now in his late 80s, speaks with urgency about these matters. It's not only to defend the landings against conspiracy theories or denial, but he's challenging UFOs because he sees them as cultural deception. He says that people now misinterpret UFO phenomena as purely scientific or mysterious, rather than as part of a spiritual battle. But Charles Duke has also talked about what it was like to be an invisible astronaut, exploring space behind the scenes. Speaking about being an invisible astronaut, Charles Duke, now 90, has recently started speaking more openly about what he calls his invisible astronaut role in NASA's Apollo program, and the reflections he shares are as deeply emotional as they are revealing. This identity shaped his life in space and how he understood his place on Earth once he returned. Before Duke ever went to the moon, his voice was already etched into history. As the cap cop for Apollo 11, he was the calm, steady line between mission control and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. When Armstrong announced, "The Eagle has landed," it was Duke's voice on the ground that replied, "Roger, tranquility, we copy you on the ground." That moment made him part of one of humanity's most iconic achievements, even though he was still on Earth. In his own reflections, Duke describes that role as carrying extraordinary emotional weight. He was literally guiding giants, while quietly longing for his own opportunity to join them. When he finally did get that chance on Apollo 16, stepping onto the lunar surface, the reality he encountered was nothing like the sanitized images the public often sees. He has remembered the incredible contrast of the moon, intensely bright and sharp, and the sky above was pitch black and so absolute that no camera could adequately capture the depth of the void. He once said, "Where we stood, the Earth was directly overhead. Looking straight up, you were looking at the opaque side of your helmet." Duke has been correcting the misconception that astronauts could simply gaze upward and see a radiant blue planet hanging in the voice. In reality, their helmets limited the field of view, and so they couldn't look straight up to see the Earth in the way many imagine. For him, the romantic imagery of the moon as a tranquil, almost poetic place doesn't match his lived experience. Instead, he describes it as harsh, alien, and spiritually intense, an environment that felt hostile and disorienting. Duke once said that while he was deeply motivated by exploration and was curious, adventurous, and focused on rocks and experiments, he never allowed himself to fully process the spiritual dimension of being on the moon in the moment. Back on Earth during Apollo 11, he carried the burden of responsibility. And then, when he got to the moon, he experienced isolation in a way that few people ever have. Charles Duke's perspective is resonant because he straddled two worlds. He guided humanity's first steps on the moon, and then he became one of the few humans to actually walk there. That gives him a vantage point unlike any other. And he got to stand on the surface and look at the same lunar terrain that he had once monitored from Houston. But Charles Duke finally breaks silence about the moon, saying that he feels like Apollo 16 is always overshadowed by future scientific discoveries, when it was the start of modern lunar science. Apollo 16, Major Scientific Achievements. Apollo 16 is often overshadowed by the drama of Apollo 11 or the near disaster of Apollo 13, but in fact, it was one of the most scientifically important missions of NASA. Charles Duke, the lunar module pilot, has long said that its achievements were buried under the glamour. One of the most groundbreaking experiments on Apollo 16 was the deployment of the first astronomical observatory on the moon. Astronauts John Young and Charles Duke set up the far ultraviolet camera and spectrograph in the Descartes Highlands, playing it in the shadow of the lunar module so it wouldn't overheat. Designed by George Carruthers of the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory, the instrument weighed about 22 kilograms and used a 75mm f1.0 Schmidt telescope to take images and spectra in the far ultraviolet range. Over the roughly 3-day surface stay, the astronauts manually pointed the instrument at targets, capturing nearly 178 images. These observations brought new insights. They recorded the first-ever ultraviolet images of Earth from the lunar surface, revealing features like the hydrogen envelope of Earth's atmosphere, polar auroras, and the air glow belt. Beyond Earth, the telescope saw hundreds of stars, galaxies, and nebulae invisible in the spectrum. This was a scientific first for humanity, as they discovered a working telescope on another planetary body. But Apollo 16's science wasn't limited to astronomy. The mission carried instruments to probe the moon's chemical makeup. One was a geochemical X-ray fluorescence spectrometer aboard the orbiting command module, which mapped the relative abundances of elements like magnesium, aluminum, and silicon on the lunar surface. These data confirmed that the Descartes Highlands landing area was dominated by highland crust materials, such as anorthosite, rather than volcanic basalt. This changed our understanding of the lunar crust formation. On the ground, during their EVAs, Young and Duke collected more than 209 pounds of lunar rock and soil, representing some of the most geologically diverse samples returned by any Apollo mission. Among them was Big Muley, a massive 11.7-kilogram breccia sample composed of shocked anorthosite and melt rock, currently the largest single rock returned from the Moon. These samples included ancient anorthosites formed more than 4 billion years ago and tiny basalt fragments thought to originate from distant lunar Maria. The region Apollo 16 targeted, which we call the Descartes Highlands, was scientifically chosen because of its two geological formations, the Cayley and Descartes formations. Before the mission, many scientists believed the Cayley region was volcanic in origin, but the rock samples revealed otherwise. Instead of molten lava, Duke and Young found impact breccias, suggesting that the landscape was shaped by meteor impacts rather than volcanism. This finding forced a major interpretation of how lunar highlands formed. Apollo 16 also carried a gamma-ray spectrometer in lunar orbit to detect elements such as potassium, thorium, and uranium. By analyzing gamma-ray emissions, scientists could map the distribution of radioactive elements across the Moon's surface and also understand its geochemical differentiation and history of crust formation. Another achievement was the planned experiment, heat flow experiment, designed to measure how heat escapes from the lunar interior. On Apollo 16, Duke drilled down to make this measurement. Unfortunately, the cable connecting the probe to the central Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments Package Station was damaged, so the instrument was inoperative. Despite this setback, the mission's design reflected NASA's ambition to probe the Moon's thermal properties. This task was later successfully carried out on Apollo 17. All of these scientific achievements give Apollo 16 a legacy that far outstrips its public profile. While the world often remembers flag painting and dramatic landings, Duke is arguing that what really matters are the data and insights collected. The mission's geological sampling redefined what we thought we knew about the Highlands' origin. Its UV observatory opened a new window on Earth and the cosmos, and its orbital instruments mapped the Moon's chemistry with unprecedented detail. Decades later, scientists still analyze Apollo 16 samples. The anorthosites and breccias they brought back continue to inform lunar chronology, while gamma-ray and X-ray data are used in comparative studies with more recent missions. Over the years, Duke has remained the main defender of moon landings, and now that he's 90, he finally breaks silence on the Moon. Defender of moon landings. At 90 years old, Apollo 16 astronaut Charles Duke, one of the 12 men to have walked on the moon, is embarking on another difficult mission. He has been protecting the Apollo legacy, especially since there are many people today that don't believe that people ever landed on the moon. Once Duke was being challenged by such people who continue to deny that the moon landing happened. In the face of such claims, his response was calm and rooted in his personal experience. He calmly said, "Sir, I was there." His credibility is boosted by the fact that he was there and can describe aspects of the mission that only a participant could know. As one of the only 4 surviving moonwalkers, Duke's testimony has been pretty important in preserving the factual history of the Apollo program. In fact, for decades, conspiracy theories have circulated claiming the moon landings were staged. Duke has confronted these claims directly, drawing on his unique authority as someone who trained for years but also lived the experience of walking on the lunar surface. He has spoken publicly about the technical details of Apollo missions, the risks astronauts faced, and the reality of standing on another world. In an interview, Duke has emphasized that the Apollo program was a triumph of human ingenuity and courage, and dismissed it as a hoax, which dishonors the thousands of engineers, scientists, and astronauts who made it possible. Duke's defense of Apollo is deeply personal. He recognizes that time is running out for those who can speak from first-hand experience. After all, of the 12 men who walked on the moon between 1969 and 1973, only a handful remain alive. Duke feels an urgent responsibility to share his story before he passes away. He has described the moon as a harsh, unforgiving environment, and a place that tested human endurance and technology to the limits. Duke has also said that he doesn't see Apollo as the end of the story. Instead, he calls it a prologue to humanity's next great chapter in space. He has been publicly supporting NASA's Artemis program, which aims to return astronauts to the moon in the coming years. For Duke, Artemis isn't repeating Apollo, but is about building a sustainable presence on the lunar surface and using it as a stepping stone for future missions to Mars. He has argued that the moon offers a crucial testing ground for technologies, habitats, and life support systems that we can eventually use for interplanetary travel. But Duke isn't the only one that believes that there's something more on the moon. Another expert has also revealed some secrets, but this isn't rooted in Christianity, but in extraterrestrial ideas. Ingo Swann in space. The new secrets from Ingo Swann, who is often called the father of remote viewing, has offered a unique perspective into space and the moon. He showed signs of unusual psychic sensitivity from a young age. He reported out-of-body experiences as early as age 3, and later participated in experiments that tested extrasensory perception. In these early trials, Swann demonstrated abilities such as influencing the growth of plants and correctly identifying the contents of sealed containers. One striking example was his ability to discern that a light bulb inside a box was burnt out, a feat that impressed researchers and marked him as a psychic prodigy. Swann's reputation led him to the Stanford Research Institute in the early 1970s, where physicists Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were conducting experiments into remote viewing. Remote viewing, a term Swann made popular, refers to the ability to perceive distant or unseen locations using extrasensory perception. Swann became one of the most accurate and reliable participants, revealing secrets about Jupiter and the Moon. One of Swann's most famous experiments occurred in 1973 when he was asked to remotely view Jupiter. Working alongside psychic Harold Sherman, Swann described features of the planet including a hydrogen mantle, violent storms, and a ring of dust and small asteroids encircling Jupiter. At the time, the existence of such a ring was not confirmed by astronomers. It was only in 1979, when NASA's Voyager 1 spacecraft flew past Jupiter, that scientists discovered a faint ring system, lending retrospective intrigue to Swann's earlier description. Swann's career took a more shocking turn when he claimed to have been secretly recruited by a government-linked agency. In his book, Penetration, he recounted being approached by a man he called Mr. Axelrod, who offered him a lucrative salary to participate in classified remote viewing missions. Swann claimed that these sessions were conducted under strict secrecy and involved targets far beyond Earth. One of the most controversial episodes in Swann's narrative was what he saw on the Moon. He revealed that he saw strange phenomena that defied conventional understanding. In fact, Swann revealed something strange is happening on the Moon, and this is completely different from what Charles Duke believes. Moon hosts industrial-scale activity. Ingo Swann has made some shocking claims about industrial-scale activity on the Moon, which remain one of the most controversial accounts in the history of remote viewing. Ingo Swann, a psychic researcher and one of the pioneers of remote viewing, participated in the CIA's Stargate project, a program that explored the potential of extrasensory perception for intelligence purposes. While his involvement in these experiments is a matter of historical record, Swann has made some sensational claims about the Moon. He revealed that he saw an atmosphere with tractor-like tracks across the lunar surface and vast industrial structures including hangars, bridges, and domes emitting a green glow. Inside the domes, he claimed to see humanoid figures engaged in activity. This suggested that the Moon was host to large-scale operations far beyond human capability. His account took a strange turn when he described that he had an alien encounter during this lunar viewing. The humanoid figures became aware of his psychic intrusion and turned to look directly at him. The sensation of being detected forced him to abruptly end the session, leaving him with the impression that these beings were not friendly. This detail added a chilling dimension to his narrative, showing that the extraterrestrials were not only present, but also monitoring human attempts to perceive them. After the mission, Swann claimed he experienced intimidation. He was being followed by mysterious handlers and encountering a woman who was extraterrestrial. The woman warned him that she was dangerous. Swann also recounted being taken to Alaska, where he witnessed a triangular UFO emerging from a lake. He interpreted the craft as an unmanned drone engaged in a resupply mission, possibly linked to lunar mining operations and the collection of water. Now that he's 90, astronaut Charles Duke is finally breaking silence on the Moon. He is revealing what he really believes about UFOs, and that they might not be from space, but from demons instead. Are you on his side? Or do you think UFOs are from extraterrestrial sources? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. So, thanks for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one.